Hello, all, and welcome to the Gestalt IT Rundown. It's your weekly look at the IT news of the week. I'm your host, Rich Straffolino, and joining me across this great land of ours is the one, the only, the networking nerd himself, Tom Hollingsworth. Tom, welcome to the show.
Hello, Rich. It's a pleasure to be back from Mobility Field Day.
Absolutely. And you know what, Tom? Funny you mentioned that. We're going to dive right into some of the news coming out of Mobility Field Day. Now, if you're not familiar with the Tech Field Day events, lots of great technical content there. A lot of times they don't necessarily make news. Sometimes you have companies coming out of stealth, but some cool items there. First one I wanted to touch on was we kind of got the first look at how Arista Networks is going to be rolling in some of their assets from Mojo Networks. If you didn't catch the news, I guess. Mojo Networks was acquired by Arista in August of this year, so just last month. And we kind of got that first look. So, Tom, what did we kind of learn what Arista wants to do with these new wireless assets?
Well, phase one is they want to run EOS on Mojo access points, but that's pretty much part and parcel. Arista wants to centralize everything onto one software platform. Makes the most sense when you think about it. They want to be able to attach that to CloudVision and other things. But I think part of what we learned is that this is still very much a company that is trying to figure out what they have. Talking to a lot of the wireless professionals out there, people who were delegates at the event, they got the feeling toward the end like they kind of saw where Mojo was and what they'd been working on for the last few months. But I think that the sense is really that Arista's just trying to figure out how they're going to accomplish this in their new cognitive campus strategy.
Now, Tom, kind of going to a blog post that you had, I believe from this week or maybe or late last week, you had kind of talked about the importance of perspective when kind of hearing this kind of news, and you had posted to something that Aviatrix is doing with their cloud networking. Do you think this is a case that because they were presenting to mobility professionals, there was a little bit of okay, this isn't, this is still in process, I think was a lot of the takeaway from the mobility professionals. Do you think if this was done in front of a networking audience, there would have been more of oh wow, this is maybe a little bit more of a wow factor there, or is it just too nascent to say regardless of the audience?
No, I think if it had been a different audience focused on networking or maybe even cloud, who knows? It would have been a much different story because this would have been new and exciting and fresh for them, a company they've never seen before. Whereas with Mojo, it's a company that most wireless professionals are somewhat familiar with, either through their Mojo Networks imprint or their former imprint of Airtight Networks. And so it's just trying to figure out, okay, they got bought. Now what happened? So it's just, like you said, it's a matter of perspective. It's seeing how the other side would see it.
Yeah, and I wonder if, when it comes to this being something that Arista uses as a selling point, if maybe those concerns are lessened just because, like you said, they're going to be dealing with traditional Arista customers who it's all of a sudden, hey, now we have wireless stuff. Hey, this is cool. We have a more comprehensive package, regardless of whether, from a wireless perspective, if it's necessarily a new or innovative or all that well baked right now at the moment. So kind of interesting there, but definitely notable to kind of see that. So you can check that out at techfieldday.com. The other news coming out of Mobility Field Day, NetScout presented, and their entire presentation was kind of focused on their tooling portfolio. They have the Link Runner G2. They have the what's the other tool, Tom? It's escaping me right now.
They have an iPerf tester. They have Link Live. They have a couple of Link runners.
Yeah. So if you're not familiar, a lot of tools for either wireless or networking professionals that let you, see signal strength and run all sorts of tests. And there are a lot of them, the ones I'm most familiar with are actually like, they're kind of dedicated Android devices that have all sorts of special hardware and tooling around them. They had a deep dive for about 2 hours, and then like an hour later, it was revealed that NetScout is divesting that entire portfolio. So, Tom, what's the detail with that, and any news on why NetScout is doing this?
So NetScout is indeed selling this portfolio to looks like an investment firm. They're wanting to pick up the tooling and kind of offer it as part of their package of companies. It makes a lot of sense. What we saw at NetScout, NetScout kind of split off the tooling division from Fluke Networks a while back. That was a little contentious because Fluke kept some things and NetScout got some things, and it never really felt like they were seeing eye to eye. And in a lot of ways, even at NetScout, the tools division felt a little underutilized because in one way, NetScout doesn't like the the tooling division of NetScout, the wireless and wired tool division, didn't like the selling model. And so now with them being under a different umbrella, maybe that sales model will change a little bit and they'll be a little bit more successful. This is just an opportunity for them to kind of grow a little bit. Now, there's also every opportunity that this is just a chance for them to get out from under the NetScout umbrella for a few months, and then they might get bought by somebody else. Who knows?
Yeah, and what's really weird to me is I guess I just assumed that the reaction I've seen every time NetScout kind of talks about this kind of stuff. They've done it now, two mobility field days in a row, kind of going over the latest updates and stuff. Extremely well received and well regarded by the people that I've seen testing them. So I think there's definitely a market there. Whether it's NetScout wanting to invest in that, hardware is it can be tough, and that's not something that you necessarily are getting a huge license volume or anything like that. It's a pretty specialized market, but I think they're going to be able to find some. I agree with you. I think this is like a reacquisition waiting to happen down the road. Speaking of acquisitions, NetApp announced a really interesting acquisition to get a little cloudier. They announced the acquisition of StackPoint Cloud, which is all one word for no discernible reason. They're a managed Kubernetes provider, and this was interesting because alongside of the acquisition, clearly this was planned out a little bit, at least the announcement. NetApp announced the creation of the NetApp Kubernetes service. So kind of already rolling that out. We don't have to kind of wait to see what this acquisition would yield, unlike what they did with Green Cloud, which they acquired, I believe, a year ago or so, where we had to kind of wait to see what they're going to do, and they rolled that into their cloud volumes, or what they released with cloud volumes. So we immediately kind of see the result of this acquisition. And it now extends the NetApp Data Fabric concept to the orchestration layer with Kubernetes. And thanks to the cloud volume extension across the major public cloud providers, they're on AWS, Azure, and Google Public Cloud, they're able to launch this on all those major platforms at once. So Tom, NetApp, the cloud company, does this seem... It seems like a really well thought out strategy to kind of do, hey, what's really hard for containers? Persistent storage across the multi-cloud. Guess what? We kind of figured that out. And now, here's all your containers that will also orchestrate for you as well.
This is a brilliant move by NetApp. And really, is anybody not a cloud company now? I love how I hear that regular places are IT companies. Walmart's an IT company. Kmart's an IT company. REI is an IT company. Well, what about IT companies? Well, they're all becoming cloud companies. And that's basically what this is. And you're right. NetApp has a solution to a problem that the container community needs a solution for: persistent storage. Now, what NetApp needs is a way to kind of leverage their existing portfolio into a cloud offering. And that's what this is going to do. And I think that when the integration between these two pieces happens, you're going to see a lot of customers that are finally making that final leap into the cloud. We've got some people that are dipping their toes in the water, and there's some people that are kind of up to their knees, but they're not quite ready to dive all the way in just yet.
Well, and this solves a problem, not even a problem, but a challenge for cloud volumes where there were very obvious benefits to using that versus using whatever stock cloud storage, whether it's AWS, Amazon, or AWS or Azure or what have you, for using that. It's still for me what always seemed like a little bit of an ask to, even if it's integrated on a first party level, to have to use something else. This gives it like a definitive use case that they can just point to and say, all of this is going to be managed for you. You're going to get all these great data services. And I think it's really funny that it's kind of taken a storage company a little while. Maybe they figured this out a while ago and just the engineering is really tough, but that to kind of disaggregate the idea of this really cool data service stuff that we do versus the machine that we put in your data center to do that stuff. And I feel like NetApp is getting there, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see other companies either already doing this or emulating this to stay relevant, certainly. All right, someone who is always relevant, but perhaps a little bitter. We got some news on Linus Torvalds, the famous creator of Linux. You always go back to that famous message board post where he was just creating a Unix clone for some super specialized hardware that'll never go anywhere. Well, it turns out went somewhere. It's called Linux. Everybody uses it. But in a post in the Linux kernel mailing list, Linus Torvalds apologized for years of hostility towards developers and is taking a break from maintaining kernel code, which he's pretty much been with some minor exceptions since the creation of Linux. The announcement came after a Linux kernel summit was moved to specifically fit in with Torvalds' vacation plans because they really wanted to talk to him about being a jerk. That's the scuttlebutt. And after the adoption of a new code of conduct that calls for positive, professional, welcoming, and inclusive behavior. The other notable time that Torvalds has stepped away from kernel maintenance was to focus on Git development. This is clearly a very different situation. But this isn't just someone's reading the tea leaves. Torvald honestly said, "I'm going to try and get help with this." Because kind of famous for just going off on swear-laden tirades to people whose code wasn't up to snuff. Tom, is this kind of a change in some of the open source methodology where, for a long time it's, hey, your code just needs to be good. Who cares about being polite?
Yeah, developers have always been prickly anyway. We've known that for years. Linus is just one of a long list of people who are basically like, you know what? If you write good code, I don't care what you do. And if you go back and you Google his response to the guy who suggested to rewrite the entire kernel in C++, I mean, you can kind of see his brand of fiery responses. But I think that this is more than just Linus getting help. I think this is the fact that there's been a culture of people built around Linus's prickly responses that have maybe not enabled this, but certainly gathered it. I mean, there are a lot of people out there that'll cheer when a guy like Linus or some other developer, leaves one of those character assassination comments that makes somebody feel like they're 3 inches tall. I know I've done it before in the past too, and I've really tried my hardest not to do it anymore because it really doesn't make anybody better. And the fact that they're literally willing to move the entire development conference because Linus is on vacation somewhere else, there's something else going on here. And I think Linus is willing to step away from it to see if that kind of stamps itself out. I applaud him for wanting to do this, just because you're right. Some people they're angry, and sometimes they just need to step away. Now, the other possibility is, I'm just throwing stones here. The last time Linus stepped away from kernel development, that project ended up getting bought by Microsoft for billions of dollars. So could this be the beginning of the sale of Linux to Microsoft?
Dun, dun, dun. You can already run it in Windows 10, folks. The end is nigh. But maybe perhaps another sign of the end times will be, we of course will have that frogs that sprout forth and breathe blood. It'll rain golf balls or something. But surely a sign of the end times is ARM in the data center. And there's a startup called Ampere that's here to celebrate the end of days as we know it. The chip-making startup Ampere released 2 ARM V8A based eMAG processors. That's a lot of acronyms that you may not be familiar with, but these are basically ARM-based server chips focused on the data center. These chips are designed for power-efficient, high-performance, and high-memory capacity workloads, aka they're targeting ML and in-memory databases as use cases. The chips will come in 32 and 16 core versions, both running at 3.3 gigahertz and costing $850 and $550 respectively. Multi-socket designs are coming in 2019, but I believe they are single socket to start out with. The company claims to be able to offer competitive performance to Intel at half the price, specifically kind of citing the Intel Gold, I think it's 1610 processors. The first gen chips are going to be built, or are being built, on a 16 nanometer process. They're planning on moving that down to 7 nanometers in 2019. Offers 8-channel DDR4, 42 PCIe 3.0 lanes, and a total system on a chip TDP of 125 watts. So pretty tight thermal package for all that. It's easy to be skeptical of another ARM server effort, Tom. I can already feel the skepticism coming across cyberspace that this is never going to happen. But there's at least a pedigree here that would indicate they know what they're doing. The CEO of Ampere is former Intel president, Renee James, and they include a number of Intel and AMD architects as their chip design teams as well. So, again, easy to be skeptical, but clearly these are people that know the server chip market pretty well, know how to design a server chip pretty well. And, obviously I'm skeptical whenever a company says, hey, we're twice as good as Intel for the same price. But is there any chance maybe specialized ML workloads, an ARM startup comes in, is disruptive? The price point sounds good.
Yeah, it's disruptive as long as what you want to run is ML workloads. Nobody cares if you're not unseating Intel. And if you think that you are, I guarantee you something you use is still running on a mainframe somewhere. Disruption is easy. Eradication, that's impossible. You're not getting Intel out of their driver's seat anytime soon, especially if what you're focusing on is things like specialized workloads. I mean, you're also competing against GPUs, and we know that GPUs are very specialized and can do things very well. So you have to ask yourself a bigger question, which is, are you comfortable being that workload right now, making money that way and finding ways to grow from that? Because you'll find out that a lot of companies are not really looking for that long-term disruption of the market. They want to make a lot of money really fast, and then they want to jump out and get on the next cash cow bandwagon.
That does raise an interesting question, though, that maybe the successor to Intel in the data center is that there aren't a mass market general purpose chip, right? And that we kind of figure out what exactly we want to do and come up instead with something that's hyper specialized, uses a tenth of the power, and is super cheap. You just have to have a proliferation of that. Then, of course, they all get powerful enough that you can define a lot of their functions by software, and then we end up with a general purpose chip 25 years down the road again. I just thought kind of interesting. I've been following the company for a while, so I was happy to see that they've actually released something and that they're not pure vaporware. So we'll keep any updates if we get any hard benchmarks, maybe from some third parties. I'd be very interested to see that outside of their own PR. But I think that will bring an end to the Gestalt IT Rundown for this week. Tom, where can people find more of your great writing? I referenced some blogs. I referenced Mobility Field Day. Tom, what are these things? How can people find them?
Well, if you want to read more of my blogs, head over to networkingnerd.net. You can get 280 character versions of my thoughts on Twitter. I'm Networking Nerd there. If you want to learn more about my Bruce Wayne job, head over to techfieldday.com. We just wrapped up Mobility Field Day. We've got Storage Field Day going on this week. We've got some more great events coming up that you want to pay attention to. And if you want to read some more of my long form writing, especially things like briefings and product reviews, head over to gestaltit.com.
Yeah, so you mentioned Storage Field Day, and speaking of Intel, they will be presenting there. I know what they're going to be talking about. Now, Intel does make some interesting storage options. You can read between the lines there to find out some cool stuff that they are going to be talking about. So definitely want to check that out. That's going on Thursday and Friday. And you can find more of me at gestaltit.com. We just posted up a kind of a first look at a really cool SMB-focused HPE server. We have all sorts of great write-ups and coverage. We did a little bit more of a look at this NetApp acquisition in an article on there. You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Anthropology. We'll be back Wednesday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time for another fantastic Gestalt IT Rundown. Until next time we meet, remember everybody, have a super sparkly day.